Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, a new news collective believes there's strength in numbers when it comes to local journalism. We meet some of its members and learn about its first joint reporting project. Later in the program, Say It with Flowers. The former chief White House florist says more than just decoration, flowers are a powerful tool for policy innovation. We'll talk to her in just a bit. But first, a coalition of Northeast Florida news organizations has banded together to tackle big issues, and their first focus is affordable housing. Here to tell us about the project, we're joined by Robert Brown, news director at WJXT News4Jax. Robert, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Deirdre Connor, CEO and publisher at the Tributary. Deirdre, good morning.
Good morning, Ann.
Paul Runestrand, executive editor at the Florida Times Union. Hi, Paul.
Hey, good morning.
And Jessica Palumbo, news director at WJCT News and editor at Jacksonville Today. Hi, Jessica.
Good morning.
So, Deirdre, we were sort of joking it's the media roundtable that's not the media roundtable, but it is. This is a project, Robert, that includes print and digital and broadcast outlets. Some are legacy outlets, some are startup outlets. Why did WJXT in particular choose to join this collaborative effort?
You know, we really feel it's important to band together when it comes to local journalism. We all see what's going on with audience fragmentation and social media, and there's just so many places where people can get their content and their journalism. And so, you know, we really believe the path forward is together. And so while we have, 3 local TV stations in the market, a number of newspapers and other publications, there is a competition, but we want everybody to win because we know that there's a bigger game at stake.
Competition is what has driven the news business, Deirdre, for a long time. And I'm curious, first of all, how the member organizations were chosen. Was everyone invited? Who were you reaching out to?
Yeah, great question. So we did reach out to all news organizations here in Jacksonville and the metro area who are producing fact-based news and information. And the majority of folks elected to participate, and think that that's a sign of the times. We really know that there was once a time where maybe this would never happen or really be unthinkable, but in the moment that we're in, where there are declining resources available for local news, that there's an opportunity for us all to work together to make more news available to more people.
Paul, in the local news business, and really, I guess, in the national news business, it's always sort of been like either we pretend you don't exist or we compete, and the idea that there's this unified front in some ways is really a change. How is that different for legacy media, if it is, than it might be for a startup or kind of a newer news outlet joining this group?
Yeah, well, innovation is probably central to what a startup, a nonprofit like the Tributary, innovation is really at their heart of why they exist and how they were founded. Legacy institutions have to keep up with that innovation in journalism in order to survive, and so this is a great example of taking a new tact at covering an important issue in our community.
I want to talk more about the trend towards collaborative journalism, Jessica, and obviously, NPR is a model of that. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is a model of that. So it's not really a strange concept to you in the work that you do, but the local angle is perhaps a little bit of an evolution.
Yeah, so the WJCT News 89.9, we've long been a part of the Florida State Broadcasting Network. We've been part of a network, a national network, and a statewide network of public radio stations. So that is a collaboration and a mindset that's very familiar for us here in the newsroom. Here locally, we also have had longstanding partnerships with many of these organizations. We've had content sharing partnerships with everybody in this room and beyond this room. So it really was a natural fit for us and for our nonprofit collaborative mentality to join together with this in a more formal way and to say, not only are we going to be sharing content, but we are all behind this specific topic that we find to be important and that we know our readers are interested in.
Yeah, and so we'll talk more about the trend towards collaborative journalism, Deirdre, but let's talk a little bit about the project that you've elected to cover in this first year of the collaboration. How did you come to choosing affordable housing as your project to focus on? And what does that mean, practically speaking, collaborating?
Yeah, great question. I think that when everybody came together to talk about, do we want to do this? Immediately the conversation went to what are the things that no one of us can fully and comprehensively cover alone. And so, unsurprisingly, affordable housing really popped to the top of the list quickly because we do know, as Jessica said, that this is an important issue that's important to everyday people in our region. I think the UNF poll that was done most recently, it used to be that affordable housing was, I think, only the top concern for 3% of people, and now it's skyrocketed to the top of the list. So, not a surprise that folks wanted to choose that. And when you look at the website for the collaborative, you can see that everybody is contributing great information and research and news around that topic in a variety of different ways.
Robert, what is it that your newsroom plans to bring to this, and how did you come to the decision that that was a priority project focus for you as well? I mean, it's something that I think News4Jax has done a fair amount of reporting on as well.
Yeah, in terms of stories, we turn stories, every day, right? And so in terms of churn and burn, the volume is there. And as Deidre mentioned, affordable housing is something that touches each one of us. Doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what you believe. And if it doesn't affect you directly, it affects someone you know. And so it's kind of a no-brainer to tackle this issue. And, for our newsroom, we really, our key mission, our North Star is helping our communities thrive, right? And so by spreading information, by letting people know about resources, we hope to contribute often.
Did you have concerns when you were thinking about this partnership that there would be other, and they're not other TV stations currently that are part of this partnership? You're the only local TV station. Was there concern that they might steal our stories? We don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing that kind of information in a way that might, make us less competitive?
Not at all. And I hope that this is, just the first step in our path to collaborate, and that we do more issues together, right? Because ultimately, it's the people of Jacksonville and Southeast Georgia who we're serving, right? And so we have to look beyond just the day-to-day tit-for-tat stuff. Of course, each publication and each organization and each TV station will have their own enterprise storytelling. But when you talk about issues like this that can really make an impact, that can really change lives, it's bigger than just us. And so, we invite everybody to come to the table, and like I said earlier, we want everybody to succeed because when our industry succeeds, we succeed.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to members of the nascent Northeast Florida News Collaborative about the reasons behind and their plans for this new media alliance. If you have questions or comments, you can join us on air at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also go to firstcoastconnect.org and find all the ways to connect with us on social. I want to ask you, Deirdre, so is the door still open? I mean, if people see the work that you're doing as this collaborative, are they still able to join? And do you know why some chose not to?
So I don't know why some chose not to, but I do know that we have as part of our agreement that we all created together is like a process for someone to join the collaborative. So yeah, if somebody is interested, they should reach out. And we've had a lot of great response to it since then. I think as Robert was saying, we live in a time of that fragmentation of information and news. And so what we need here in our community and in every community is like a thriving and diverse news ecosystem. And this is one way of helping folks understand what kind of components make up that ecosystem, maybe exposing them to organizations that, if they are typically watching television, they should know that Channel 4 has one of the biggest newsrooms on the East Coast. And then they should also, understand more about the ownership of news organizations in our community. And, I think this is a way of highlighting for folks who are interested in getting a really robust news diet of local information, how they can do that, and who's interested in making sure that we have that for everyone.
Jessica, you mentioned that Jax Today has had partnerships previously with many of these news outlets, and in practice that is publishing those stories and then linking to the original news outlet. But I'm curious, will this be different in terms of, are you going to be working jointly on stories, or are you just going to be sharing other people's content?
Well, first of all, it is a larger group of news organizations that we can pull from. So we've had News4Jax on our site, we've had the Tributary on our site before. Now we're going to be pulling from the Baker Press, the Jacksonville Free Press, the Jacksonville Business Journal. That's a new partner who's part of this partnership. So all of our stories we can collectively pull together and post on our own sites, which is really exciting. And at the same time, part of the collaboration, the collaborative effort is to sit together in a room and talk about how can we amplify what we're doing? How can we work together potentially? How can we bring in maybe experts? One really exciting thing that's come out of this collaboration so far is since we've announced it, we've been reached out to by several public officials. And Deirdre, you might speak to some of those who we personally were reached out to by the mayor's office and others who are saying, okay, you have our attention as a collaborative now. We would like to come meet with you, speak with you, and talk about what the coverage can look like going forward, how they can connect with us, connect with our readers and our listeners and our viewers. And so that's a huge win right out the gate, that we're getting attention by just announcing that this is a collaborative and we are focused on this topic.
And I appreciate you bringing in the other member papers. It's probably worth saying the member papers currently are the Baker County Press, the Jacksonville Business Journal, the Jacksonville Free Press, Jacksonville Today, News4Jax, WJXT, the Florida Times Union, and the Tributary. Paul, when you are planning stories, I mean, part of this is, as Jessica alluded to, a way to draw attention to the reporting that you all are doing on this subject, and presumably to kind of drive that conversation to advance policy of some type. So what is the critical mass useful for on that front? Like, whose eyeballs are you specifically wanting to grab?
Yeah, certainly would love to amplify the stories that people affected by this issue have. Not all of those voices are always heard or elevated. And so by being able to tell the story of people affected by this issue and get those voices in front of those who have the ability to make change in that, right? Whether that's public officials, nonprofits, anyone who has that power to affect change on this important societal issue in our community. And the great way to do that is by amplifying one another, right? Robert talked about media fragmentation. Think of your own media diet. We've listed, 7, 8 organizations. Very few people probably have all 8 of those organizations as part of their media diet. If you are a regular listener of WJCT, watch Channel 4, but you don't read the Times Union, 1, shame on you. But 2, they can help amplify our journalism and get that journalism in front of more folks, and we can do the same for them. So just amplifying the journalism and making sure it reaches as many eyeballs as possible, just so that this conversation on this issue is at the forefront and gets the attention it deserves, is really important.
How does it impact the accountability to the community or the credibility overall of each member organization to have this wider platform? I'm thinking, there's some communities that have not maybe been, as well served by mainstream media or any media, historically. That's something that a lot of news outlets are working to correct. But whether it's more rural communities or communities of color, does having this broader shared platform allow newsrooms to kind of make up for what they might lack in terms of that attention or diversity of perspectives?
It does, and the diversity of our collaborative, including, say, the Baker County Free Press, that's an area that we don't have boots on the ground and eyes on quite as frequently, but the folks there do, and they can tell their stories to us and amplify those stories. Same with the Jacksonville Free Press. One of the things, as newsrooms get a little bit smaller, it just means that you have less geographic coverage of boots on the ground, eyes on issues, as many different perspectives and as many different people to bring those issues back to the newsroom and say, we really need to be covering this or that. And so joining together to help identify those stories and those needs, and even deciding on this topic collaboratively like that, was really important to get those perspectives and land on that decision.
I just want to work in a few comments. Jimmy from Facebook saying, this is an incredibly important initiative, and I commend the newsrooms that are taking part. Local journalism is vital as a civic watchdog. Last night's city council vote to defeat a general resolution supporting the media was particularly revealing. That, of course, is a resolution that was put forward by Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman. And the goal was to commend all local media organizations for keeping Jacksonville informed. That resolution was pulled from the consent agenda yesterday after some pushback. Deirdre, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I mean, that was the first that I think anybody in this room had heard about that, is when it happened. So I don't know really what that was designed to do, But it certainly is important, and I think this is something that everybody in the collaborative agrees, is to help folks understand not only what types of local news is available to them, but also why local news is so important. I think right now it's, probably people probably feel bombarded by news, but a lot of what they're feeling bombarded by is not news from our community here in Northeast Florida. And so, what I would encourage folks to do is to evaluate your media diet. And it's not that it's not important to pay attention to what's happening nationally, but if you find that maybe you're reading or sharing more stories from outside of Jacksonville than from inside of Jacksonville, like maybe do a little balance, like one for one, so that you're getting as much information about your neighborhood as you are about the country as a whole.
I wonder if the need for collaboration is greater now. Are the stories just bigger? I feel like there's stories that we all want to cover, whether it's, medical issues like vaccines or climate change or election integrity, that they matter to our local readers and listeners and viewers, but they also are really hard to tell in a holistic way as part of a bigger story. And it would appear that kind of those, I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't know that the stories themselves are necessarily harder to cover, but, something that folks should know is there are just substantially fewer local journalists working in our region than ever before, or even really in recent history, and Florida as a state ranks dead last of 50 states in media outlets per capita. So while we have a lot of incredible outlets here in our region, and that's, what makes this collaborative so vibrant, we also have to understand that, the supply of local journalism is not what it once was. And so that's why this collaboration is important, is really so that we can maximize the resources that all of us have to bring into reporting, and each sort of stay in our lane and, go into, new communities and reach new folks with more news than they would have otherwise had available to them.
Robert, do you feel like the newsrooms here and in the country were impacted in some ways by, the pandemic, COVID, the restrictions that put on our ability to be in our communities or to, venture into places? And then also, the protests that followed the George Floyd murder. There seemed to be an idea in at least a lot of newsrooms that the goal was less about, getting there first, but sort of making sure that the community was getting that information, however that was going to happen, that there was sort of this added obligation to just get that information or that data out to people so that they could be making decisions and, understanding the big picture. Do you think that has had any measurable impact on the way that we view competitiveness in this market or in the national market?
Absolutely. I think going back to COVID in 2020, I was running the assignment desk in Orlando. And, so part of my job was day to day, pairing crews together, setting up stories, assigning stories, and, even things like the ability to physically and logistically go cover stories change, right? Because of safety. And so when you think about the proliferation of Zoom calls and right. And so that's a whole workflow change. And so I think pandemic just exacerbated everything and it sped everything up to a degree. And so it really, put the onus on us as news organizations to rethink about how we do things, how we cover stories, what's the most efficient, what's the most safe way to cover stories. And so I think that's definitely a bigger element of it, the work from home thing, right? As journalists, I'm a big proponent of the stories not in the newsroom. So if you talk to any of our reporters, I'm like, you got to get out, right? Like,
go outside.
You got to talk to real people and see what the issues are. It's just, it's different to have a face-to-face conversation as opposed to email. And then the one other thing I wanted to say is, we all, the word media, right? Personally, and you could say I have an old soul, it irks me. All journalists are a part of media. Not all media is journalism. And I think that's incredibly important as we talk about media diet and consumption. I mean, we have to vet everything that we see on social media. And we as journalists have a great responsibility, right, to get it right and to validate and verify. And so, I just think that's a really, really important thing for people to know and to understand, because when you see something on Facebook or on X, you got to stop for a second, pause, and really critically think about where the information's coming from. Is it verifiable? And is it something you can trust, particularly local news?
I,
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, and I do want to come back to you, but I mean, in terms of that point, it does seem that in some ways media is less about competing with each other and perhaps more about competing with, you know, politicians or corporations or lobbyists or people who are filling that space when that is left if media isn't there, who are not bound by the same obligations and ethical guidelines that journalists are. So that, you know, the field of media as it shrinks is being supplanted by influencers or people who are trying to message but are not necessarily doing so arguably responsibly.
Well, yeah, everybody has the ability to be a citizen journalist, right? And so I'm not here to say whether it's right or wrong, because I do think that access is a big thing, right? Like when you think about some of the largest stories that have broke, I mean, you mentioned George Floyd, the young lady who took that, you know, that video. That was a critical piece of storytelling. I think she won the, you know, like Pulitzer Prize for it. And so I think there's some value to that access, but there's also a threshold, right? Like there are things that we know as journalists that we have to do before we can put a story out. And so to your point, when you think about organizations or politicians or, you know, anything that's making these huge investments in media departments or things like that, you know, our goal is never to shape a narrative. Our goal is just to report the facts as they come. And I think that's critically important.
Deirdre, you were going to say?
Well, I think it's important that folks know that every single organization that's part of this collaborative has agreed to, and they already were, but like, you know, said publicly, we adhere to the Society for Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, which is available online if you want to look it up. And I think we have it linked to the site. And, you know, that is not something that everything that comes across your feed is adhering to. And so this is a group of organizations who have stepped forward and said, hey, like, here's what we believe. Here's how we report the news. Hold us accountable for that. We're going to turn around and take your comments and things that are important to this community and hold our elected leaders, you know, accountable for that, discover solutions and do some reporting on this key issue. But I think, you know, an interesting thing is that next week is News Literacy Week. I learned this recently. And for folks who are wondering, like, how do I just like get a better news and media diet? You can check out News Literacy Project online, and they have kind of a quick way of assessing, like, if you're looking at a website or an app or anything like that, how can you assess whether this is news or whether it is advocacy or whether it is AI slop or, you know, any of those things?
Jessica, Robert mentioned the video that was taken during the George Floyd killing. We've seen just in the past week some really important videos come out of Minneapolis that has changed not only the narrative of what happened versus the official narrative of what was said to have happened, but also perhaps changing policy, changing outcomes. So those were taken by observers. Is there something that we're learning about the importance of reporting just from the Minneapolis experience overall?
Well, firsthand accounts and things that people can see with their eyes and be able to compare that to messages that they're hearing from other places. That's a very important function of that storytelling, as Robert said. And I think with members of the News Collaborative adhering to journalistic ethics codes, you can know that when you're getting your information from a news source, a trusted news source, that you know that you're getting context, you're getting ethical storytelling, which is important. And I think going back to the previous point about media and maybe not supporting the media writ large, you know, it's easy as journalists to kind of bristle at that at first, but you also don't blame people for not understanding when you're painting with that broad brush of the media. People might be thinking of national outlets. They might be thinking of social media influencers, even on the local level, who might be giving them information that's not always reliable. And so it is important to be able to assess, where am I getting this? Is it coming from a journalistically sound source? Is it coming from somebody who is adhering to this code of ethics, who is only searching for the truth and trying to tell us that? And that is very important when we're vetting members of who is part of the Northeast Florida News Collaborative. Do we believe as a group that they are adhering to that code? And we are assessing that on a case-by-case basis for this project.
Yeah. We've got a call from John on the south side. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having this conversation. A couple questions with regard to the Northeast Florida News Collaborative. Does it include media outlets that are based outside of Jacksonville, that are corporations that have outlets in a whole variety of other cities? And is that truly local? And then additionally, well, I could think of a few additionals, but I'm driving. I'm sorry. I'm kind of a little flighty. But it seems like in recent years, things have changed to where I think the first Trump administration, we started seeing all these stories from national news outlets with unnamed sources. When I was in journalism school 2 decades ago, you had to have typically 3, and I think that was promoted in high schools as well. Yeah. You needed to have 3 named sources, not a bunch of unnamed sources. And then additionally, there was a concern in those days about the consolidation of media. It seems like any collaborative holds the potential for there to be a common theme or narrative that kind of goes against the idea of independent journalism.
Gotcha, John. All good questions. So first of all, news outlets in this area, many of them are owned by a larger corporation. Is that a determining factor? Does that in any way impair their local journalism bona fides? Anyone's thoughts?
I can speak for us, and we're owned by Grand Media Group, which owns 6 stations in the U.S. And in no way, shape, or form have I ever been given an edict or a mandate to, hey, we have to cover this story this way. And I think that's critically important, especially when we talk about local journalism, right? Yeah. There's never a narrative. There's never a, hey, you need to follow these codes. It's always our local editorial standards, right? And so
we know that's not true for some national broadcasting, organizations, and they have pressured affiliates to cover certain things or to, even broadcast certain things on their local airwaves. So that is, it does exist. To his question about sourcing, the sourcing issue, Paul, has changed. Recently, you really do see a lot more unnamed sources, and more often than not, I think you can track the phrase, for fear of retribution, for fear of their personal safety. You see that a lot in unnamed source attributions these days.
Yeah, sure. We certainly try to avoid unnamed sources, get people on the record whenever possible. A lot of what the unnamed sources can do for our reporting process, I assume others as well, is inform the reporting process. So it's taking things, if someone is uncomfortable putting their name behind something for, say, fear of retribution, that information can, of course, inform the reporting process. We can take that information elsewhere, verify it, get it through official sources, through documents, through someone speaking on the record. So there's a lot of use of sources whose names don't go into the eventual reporting, but kind of point us in the right direction. That's probably a more responsible use than printing someone's claims just all at once without a name attached to it.
I mean, when there is so much quote unquote retribution, and I'm thinking mostly of social media blowback, it's not just ordinary people that don't want to put their names to stories anymore, Jessica. It's elected officials. It's people who are in positions arguably of great power who don't want to comment on something because they're worried that they will be targeted, harassed, perhaps even, put in a position of peril because they don't want to be saying the wrong thing publicly.
Well, here in our Jacksonville Today and WJXT News 89.9 newsroom, we've definitely encountered people who are reluctant to go on record, who are in positions of power many times. And what you have to do is find that information in a public record, ideally. Keep talking, keep digging, keep finding others who will verify what you're talking about. Hopefully the records will speak for themselves and you can tell the story that way. Find it in a court document, find it elsewhere. You just have to keep working that much harder when people don't want to go on record, and still keep those relationships open, even if they aren't going on record. Still check in with that official, still have the relationship going. So again, you can get information that will point you in a better direction and inform the reporting in ways that you can verify publicly.
I just briefly want to take a call from Tom on the west side. Just briefly, Tom, please go ahead.
Okay, as quickly as I can. Just want to say that I think the city council vote on media support just shows that they think they can hold on to their positions without media, and perhaps in spite of media. The Constitution was the First Amendment. First Amendment was freedom of the press, and as a journalism student, former journalism student, I find that appalling that they just have decided to just ignore that part.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. We are going to have to wrap up here, but other than this initiative on affordable housing, what's the time frame for it? When will it wrap up? And what's next? Do you think there'll be another project? Particularly curious myself about election coverage, because I do feel like that's an area that we all struggle to cover, and it's hard to get deep on. I mean, Paul, I think that's something you probably know well because of all the coverage that the Times Union has historically done into elections, just trying to find the bodies to cover the races, interview the people in person. So I'm just curious, what's driving your next projects?
I think the group this is kind of a pilot year. So this is like an experiment, and the group agreed to do this for 1 year and really see where it goes. But, elections have come up because they're really labor intensive for every news outlet. And so, and there, for all the talk about affordable housing, there were about 50 other topics that I think came up in that conversation that the group would like to tackle. So I'm excited to see what comes next.
All right. Well, I'm excited to see what it comes next too. It's great to talk to all of you. I think it's a really cool initiative. So I appreciate it. Robert Brown, Deirdre Connor, Paul Rennestrand, Jessica Palumbo. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, a former White House floral designer reveals the secret behind political flower power. Welcome back. In 2009, my next guest became the White House chief floral designer. It was the first time the position was open in more than 3 decades, and the application process was grueling. 7 months of interviews culminating in a 4-hour reality TV-style competition with 2 other finalists. Laura Dowling is the keynote speaker at the Garden Club of Jacksonville's fundraiser this week, and we're thrilled to be able to talk to her. Laura Dowling, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We're also joined by Sonia Jones, the CEO of the Garden Club of Jacksonville. Sonia, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
So, Laura, the idea, of this job as White House florist, I think we don't have really any idea what the scope is of that job. So can you start by just describing for us a little bit about not just your day-to-day work, but sort of your annual obligation when it came to providing floral arrangements for the White House?
So it's such an interesting title. It sounds very quaint, almost like a Jane Austen, character where I would go around and water bouquets. But it was really so much more than that. It was the creative director, the artistic director, really, of White House decor and installations, everything from the major holiday events and state dinners to the everyday and personal activities of the first family. So a huge job logistically. It involved sometimes planning dozens of events that would happen every day, from small to large, big budgets, lots of staff, hundreds of volunteers. So, yeah, the idea of just being a florist, I think it was much bigger than that.
And when you're talking about things like the White House Christmas celebration, that's something that is important for people who are visiting the White House, but it's also the kind of thing that gets just enormous attention. There's, film crews that are going through, there's interviews being conducted about what went into it. And so when are you starting to plan for something like that, the design, the look, and who are you working with?
So it's at least a year-long planning process, and it's iconic, and there's so much history, right, with that even one event. Every First Lady has the opportunity to set a theme and articulate a vision, and so I was always very conscious of that, would do research on themes, and there were some recurring themes that First Ladies loved, the Nutcracker. Jackie Kennedy started that and was the first White House theme. So working with the First Ladies team, the team in the residence, all the volunteers, putting together and inviting guest designers to join in and be part of it. I think the idea was to create something that would be beautiful visually, but also resonate with people visiting. So what I would always try to do is come up with an overarching theme, inspirational. One of my favorites was simple gifts. And then each room would articulate a gift of the holidays, being with friends and family, the gift of music, the gift of entertaining, and then the decor would go from there. But it was definitely, I think, one of my favorite activities to plan at the White House, and I always loved to see the visitors and see the joy on people's faces when they came through.
One of the responsibilities you have as well is planning for state dinners, which are sometimes very lavish events, but they're also really important from a political standpoint and sometimes a strategy standpoint for the White House. And you came to floral arranging as a policy expert. You didn't grow up designing flowers or running a floral shop. This was something you came to pretty late in your professional life. So tell us how your background informed your jump into the work that you do now.
So I've always loved flowers. I grew up in the Northwest and love gardens, and I come from a family of artists. So I feel like I always had that in the background. But I studied political science and public administration, and as you said, spent my career as a policy analyst, communications strategist. So when I started working with flowers, I immediately saw how flowers can change the way people think and feel, and that flowers could actually be a communications tool, a very effective one. So I feel like I started deploying that in my planning process. So, for example, the first state dinner with India, starting with the theme that had to do with the Indian peacock, which is very symbolic in Indian culture, which led to the color scheme that was bright and vivid, and then working in other themes, the environmental aspect of using sustainably harvested magnolia for decor. So each element of the decor would be symbolic and then could then fold up into an overarching story that would carry out a diplomatic message.
I sort of alluded in your introduction to this really rigorous process of selection for you as White House florist. Can you tell us a little bit about the pressures and just the intensity of that process? Because it sounds it does sound a little bit like a reality show.
Yeah. Well, the intensity is something that you never forget. So that competition, I think, prepared me for the rigors of the job. But I'll never forget that day, that the final competition of 3 finalists, we were all sequestered in different rooms at the White House, had 4 hours to create an assigned list of designs, a state dinner table, a blue room design, an Oval Office piece. And 4 hours seems like a lot, but it actually went by so quickly. The First Lady was the judge, so she came by each of our rooms, and we talked about the displays. And I do remember telling her about this idea of the garden style and how it could help effectuate her own vision. She had already had the kitchen garden at the White House. This is Mrs. Obama. So from the start, we were talking about using flowers as a communications tool. But the intensity of the job, you never can make a mistake, right? There always has to be a plan, a backup plan. You have to plan for contingencies and just the magnitude. I went from doing part-time flowers from my kitchen table to planning state dinners for hundreds of people. And so to wrap my head around how that scope and scale change was pretty intense, and I will say was challenging at first.
It sounds it. Sonia, why is it that the Garden Club has brought in Laura? What is it that she's going to be speaking to the group about or doing while she's here for this fundraiser?
Okay, so every year we have a Designer of Distinction event, and we try to bring the best national, maybe even international speakers to come. The reason we chose Laura this year, and we're so excited to have her join us, is her extensive history and the different organizations that she's worked with. But also, like you said, this came on late in her career, so she's bringing other interests to us, and that's what set her apart. Her designs are absolutely beautiful, and we actually sold out pretty quickly because of the amount of talk that came about when she came.
Yeah.
So,
And for people who are watching our live stream, we are seeing some of your beautiful floral arrangements, some including from the White House. And, this event that you're in town for, thankfully you made it in. I know that you had some flight trouble like a lot of the world did getting in last night. So the event is today and tomorrow. I'm just curious if you could leave our listeners to, given your expertise and you have this book with you, you perhaps could even hold up to show, but are there a couple of just basic tips for people who are not necessarily moving into a professional realm with their floral designing, but really want to make something look special and not just like they grabbed it off of the grocery store, bouquet rack?
Well, I think that flowers are inherently beautiful. And so by, I think, approaching the design process with an open mind and with a little bit of confidence, there are so many tutorials and things now, Instagram and I think social media, YouTube, you can find tutorials for basic techniques. But I think my biggest tip is to be inspired, find something, a color, a theme, and go from there and focus less about the nitty-gritty technical requirements and just create something that's pleasing to you. I think that's what I learned when I studied in Paris, that you can make almost anything look beautiful. The humble carnation or garden greens can make a very effective container. So it's just taking that spark of inspiration and following it where your heart leads you.
Well, it is great to meet you, Laura Dowling. Your work is really inspiring and your story is so interesting. So thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you again, Ann.
And Sonia Jones, thank you for being here as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, up next, an Amelia Island festival celebrating the art of storytelling and the magic of live performance.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com.
It's the sound of trust, of calm, of clarity. The sound of WJCT News 89.9, bringing the world to Jacksonville every morning with NPR and local reporting that leads the way.
On the next Fresh Air, as much of the nation contends with sub-freezing temperatures, we speak with the New York Times' David Gullis about the Trump administration's campaign to reverse policies aimed at combating climate change. Gullis is just back from Davos, where Trump called those efforts the Green New Scam. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
As ICE surges in Minneapolis, Pastor Sergio Amezcua and thousands of volunteers are delivering groceries to people too afraid to leave their homes.
We currently have over 27,000 families registered to receive food. We are distributing like 100 tons of food weekly. Even today, that is like below zero. Like we're still working right now delivering food.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
President Trump promised to overhaul federal student loans and financial aid policy. Now those changes are rolling out. New restrictions on who can borrow and how much, the end of a Biden-era repayment program, and new money for short-term career training programs. What this all means for tens of millions of borrowers next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. A 3-day festival celebrating the power of live performance kicks off at the annual Festival of Stories and Songs. And here to tell us about it are the event creators and co-founders of Story and Song Center for Arts and Culture, Donna Paz Kaufman and Mark Kaufman. Welcome back to both of you.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for coming down today. We appreciate it. It's great to see you again. So you founded the bookstore/bistro 8 years ago. It has since become a community hub for artists and creatives of all kinds. But for people who aren't familiar with it, just tell us a little bit about kind of what the kind of the genesis was of the bookstore, what the conceit was when you formed it, and also a little bit about how the pandemic impacted its evolution.
Well, we came to Amelia Island 25 years ago from Nashville, and our favorite thing to do was to go out and listen to singer-songwriters. So once we moved here, we started inviting some of the friends we had come to know because Donna had started a songwriter night at the bookstore that she used to manage in Nashville. And the series took off. We ran it for about 15 years, called it an evening of story and song. So that was the origin. And I think what we appreciated was so many of our songwriter friends saying, well, you know, I'm really an author with attention deficit disorder. That's why I write songs. But they are stories in their own right.
Yeah. The focus on live storytelling, live performance, Donna, why is that so important, not just to you as someone that puts on this festival, but to us in the audience? Why does it matter?
Well, and as we were waiting, listening to the first segment today, I'm reminded that we are surrounded by stories. You cover local stories, regional stories. We are inundated with stories on the national and international stage. So stories are part of our lives. And we decided that the Festival of Stories and Songs would embrace all of the art forms so we could tell the personal stories, the stories of transformation, the stories that changed our lives, made us laugh, had us look at life in a different way. So these are stories that are told personally, which you could go onto YouTube and see lots of things. You can talk with people on social media, but it's not the same as being together in one room, taking in a shared experience.
And I would say that the need for those kinds of stories, as opposed to perhaps the stories that we're talking about, you know, that are everywhere, which are sometimes harder to hear or perhaps don't carry quite the same inspirational level or just kind of emotional weight. Mm-hmm. So the stories that you focus on and the guests that you're bringing in really are rooted in, you know, human experience. Very often they're comic entertainers, but they also have some very poignant messaging as well. So how do you choose the folks? Who are you looking forward to most this year?
Well, one of the things that we loved doing last fall was going to the National Storytelling Festival. And that's been going on for 50 some years. So we sat in on 27 hours of storytelling. And these storytellers were from all over the place with all kinds of different personalities and life stories. So we binged in person, and our whole committee we've watched a lot of performers together to see, is there the audience connection? Is there the heartstrings? Is there the laughter? Because Mark and I always say that story and song is what saves us right now. We talked about the diet of news earlier today. I think we all need to take a look at the diet of the information that we take in. And so we'd like to invite people to come and sit, feel connected in a human way, and laugh a lot.
Yeah.
So we got to see some of the people that had been here the first 2 years. We met some new people as well. And I think what impressed me the most was the variety of stories. So you had some that were incredibly personal, like Kevin Kling, who was one of our guests last year, talks about, being born with a birth defect that left him without the use of a hand, and then getting into a motorcycle accident that left him without the use of his other arm, and how he can stand on stage and crack wise is just remarkable. And then there are others, I think, who just have so much fun making up stories. Like one of our guests was Paul Strickland, who makes up a story about his aunt true and his uncle false.
Right. Well, let's get to this year because we've only got about 40 seconds left. Oh. But we've got the headliner is Carmen Agrediti. She's a children's storytime storyteller and an Emmy Award-winning children's program creator. You also have Andy Offutt Irwin, who is a singer-songwriter and a humorist. You have Rough and Tumble and Flagship Romance performing music. So what do you want people most to know about how to attend, how to get involved?
Well, I think in terms of how to get involved and what you'll get, think variety show. We will have so many different people bringing all kinds of instruments. We've got mandolins, we've got ukuleles and guitar. And so these folks are not only telling stories, they're bringing them to life with their music. So go on to storyandsongarts.org and look at the schedule. Since we're so close, it starts tomorrow night.
Yeah.
We are starting to sell out of a couple of shows.
Yeah. And I think this is just our version of Prairie Home Companion.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, it's a great event. Mark Kaufman, Donna Paz Kaufman, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for all you do.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Ann.
All right. Join us tomorrow when we say yes and to Jacksonville's first ever brick and mortar club for improv. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. Scenic Jacksonville presents the Great Cities Symposium on February 5th. Victor Dover, city builder and town planner, shares how he has transformed cities, streets, and neighborhoods through urban design across the U.S. Tickets available at scenicjacksonville.org.